So now my harimai, welcome to our NDF online session focused on oral history and sound archives and why collect them. We have two wonderful presenters for you today. That's Sue Berman and Renée Orr from Auckland Council Libraries, Kauri members for NDF. Welcome, Sue and Renée. So this is the second in a series of co-created webinars with Auckland Council Libraries. We're really excited to have them join us, and we have lots of people joining us today to hear your thoughts. For people that don't know me, I'm Rachel Davies. I am Head of Touring Exhibitions at Te Papa, but my other hat is as an NDF board member. So even though I can't see you, it's lovely to have you all here today. So just before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. So to keep our session running smoothly, we're just going to ask you to keep yourselves muted for now and keep your cameras off so the focus is all on our lovely speakers. This session is being recorded, so you're going to have a chance to review or share with a link with colleagues. And we'll also share links to resources. We'll send that out from NDF the next couple of days. So at the end of the session, we're going to have some questions and comments. They're more than welcome. So please use the chat feature, as you were already doing, to ask questions, and we'll have that time at the end. So let's not listen to me too much. We're super excited to welcome Sue Berman and Renée Orr as our presenters. Sue is the curator of oral history and sound archives, as I said, from Auckland Council Libraries. She's had decades of experience in recording, collecting and interpretive work. And Renée leads the curatorial services team at the libraries and started her library career in Auckland Library over 20 years ago. And Renée has a deep love for research and documentary heritage collections within a public library context. So I feel that we're in excellent hands here, and I'd like to hand over to our presenters. So yeah, welcome, and away you go.
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā iwi tēnā koutou. Ko tēnei taku mihi ki ngā tangata whenua o te rohe nei, ka mihi hoki au ki ngā tohu o te rohe nei. Tēnā koutou katoa e huhui mai nei ki te kōrero tuihono I tēnei rā. E mahi ana au hei pou arahi I ngā pātaka kōrero o Tamaki Makaurau, ko Renée o toka wangua. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings everybody, and I offer my respects to you all gathered here for this webinar today. My name is Renée Orr and I'm the team leader curatorial services here at Ngā Pātaka Kōrero o Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland Council Libraries. Many thanks Rachel for the warm welcome. We are delighted to be here today to talk about the value of housing an oral history collection, as well as some of the technical aspects of managing this format. So I'm going to kick off with some brief context around our collecting practice here at Auckland Council Libraries and the work of our team. And then I'll hand over to Sue, who will get into the specifics of oral history and what it has to offer. I'll start with a brief introduction to the work of the curatorial services team. This is not us. We're a team of 12 and we're not all skinny white dudes, but perhaps like this unidentified band, part of the lineup at a Renée Gayer concert at His Majesty's Theatre in Queen Street, we are a bit of a support act. The main star is the heritage collections, and they're here for the public. We're a little bit like the audience. So the collections are rich and varied and include published rare books, newspapers, magazines, music and maps from Aotearoa, the Pacific and overseas, published photographs, ephemera, archives and manuscripts, oral history, as well as taonga Māori and Pacific collections across all published and unpublished formats. It's a lot. Curatorial services are one of 6 teams that make up research and heritage, and we are specifically charged with holding the subject matter expertise for our heritage collections, developing them further through ongoing collecting, and creating opportunities for the people of Tamaki and beyond to use and enjoy them. So this is specialist work, and it's a privilege to have a dedicated oral history curator to be part of that work. There's been historical support within our organisational history for this too. Waitakere City Council was the first in the country to specifically employ an oral historian. Having said that, there have been projects of purposeful regional collecting that date back to the 1970s. So another very brief introduction to this time to the collections. So the oral history and sound archives include both of these distinct types of recordings. The current collection includes around 7,000 items, and around half of the road's records are discoverable via Kura Heritage Collections online. It's a well-used and valued collection by both researchers and by our staff. What are we looking for? How do we develop this collection? So this statement on the slide here, you'll find on our library website, where we've published our current collecting plans and where we invite donations from the public. We found it useful to let people know what our current priority areas for collecting are, and to provide a clear pathway for people to get in touch with us if they have material they think might be a good fit. It's useful for other institutions as well, and we're always happy to connect with our colleagues in the wider sector around how we can work together on our shared mahi that is collecting the collective memory of the country. In the Oral History and Sound Archives collecting plan specifically, you'll find a lot of detail. So it covers our aspirations, it covers the history and formation of the collections, their geographic scope, formats, areas of strength, and our current priorities. You can read that in your own time. I will hand over to Sue, who will explore more about the why of collecting oral history and sound.
Tēnā koutou katoa hui mai. Thanks NDF for this invitation and opportunity to have this discussion, and to Renée for her mihi and scene setting. So my background is in research and community development and oral history project work based in libraries. And as Rachel said, I've been recording for decades, over 30 years now. I started back in the day when we were recording on tape recorders, but I was, however, an early adapter to digital. I have learnt from many in the work, the wisdom of colleagues and mentors over the years, from theory to practice in the community, through academic presentations and papers and conferences, support from Turnbull Library staff, Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision, Manatū Taonga, and through our professional association, Te Curatorial Waho o Te Motu, not the National Oral History Association of New Zealand, shorthand, no hands. So I want to acknowledge the past and the present, whose work has contributed to creating and valuing oral history collections across the motu. I'm sure some of you are here today, and I look forward to you adding your voice to the end of this presentation and discussion. But I'm going to talk briefly to what is oral history and the diversity and value it brings to special collections, before focusing on considerations for managing a collection for perpetuity, plus hopefully leave some time for discussion. So one of my observations is the depth and breadth of understanding given to the recording and use of oral history here in Aotearoa. There are a couple of resources to recommend that reflect this more fully. Firstly, I've learned much from the work of Dr. Nepia Mahuaka, whose book Rethinking Oral History and Tradition, an Indigenous Perspective, was published in 2019. He offers a valuable insight for changes in theory and practice that reflect a shifting value associated to the term oral tradition, knowledge and experience expressed through waiata, karakia, whakaaro, and draws on his own lived experience of whānau, hapu, iwi, to discuss what's required to sit in the work of contemporary Māori oral history. While focused here in Aotearoa, Nepia's work is well received and quoted internationally as part of a body of work that challenges colonial narratives and practices. I want to also recommend the book Remembering and Becoming Oral History in Aotearoa, New Zealand, edited by Anna Green and Megan Hutching, published just last year. This book illustrates the strength of oral history collecting. Anna Green identifies and discusses different forms of collecting and writing, acknowledging different content creation forms, Māori, community, commissioned, activist, academic, as pathways for generating collections. Then through the book chapters, writers bring to life the value of this collecting through their work of interpretive writing, generating a number of fascinating social history pieces. And historian Paul Diamond, in his Radio New Zealand review of the book, mentions the training that we had installed in us by oral history matriarch Judith Fife, which I still convey when delivering training myself. The notion that we don't just record interviews for the moment of contemporary interpretation, but for a person in 100 years who will discover, re-examine, and write of a time by drawing on these precious primary sources, the taonga voices. And this is why special collections, archives, libraries are so critical, because we are the storehouses of these collections. So, what is it that we're creating and collecting in oral history? Broadly, oral history captures the recollections and memories of people's lived experiences, sometimes on topic or specific subject interest, and sometimes as life histories. They often include both family or personal history alongside the social history details. Interview methods are designed to use open questions or themed sets of talking points, and listening is really critical to being responsive to the interviewee. Interviewers encourage recollections beyond the dry bones of sort of time and dates and place, inviting people to describe the fullness of memory. This might include how it felt or associated sounds and observations. And so through that methodology, we create interviews which are rich in detail and nuance. They help give researchers insights not always otherwise presented in official or journalistic records. So another part of good practice has a technical point of view, because we're doing this in order to serve those researchers in 100 years. We require good audio preservation recordings, and to create that, we create from that clear audible records for future generations. Interviews are at a time multilingual. They include descriptions of places and landscapes, migration, work, industry, culture and religious practice, sports and games, music and art, reflection of events, sometimes of national significance, and sometimes of private and everyday domestic lives. They can also include stories of struggle and significantly difficult life moments. One of the key values of these recordings is how, when re-listened to, these unscripted personal reflections transport us across time and space. So let's have a listen. This is a short clip that illustrates something of that transporting effect. It was recorded in 2002 onto still a cassette tape at that time, and has been digitally migrated. So you might hear something of that sound time. It's an interview with John Munro for a local history project in Ranui, West Auckland. And this reflection actually comes quite near the end of the interview. So if you haven't got your speakers on, I'm sorry for you, but here it comes.
But it certainly isn't the isolated place it used to be. It's, got all good bus service through there now and rail. When I drive through there now and see all the houses on either side of the road, gosh, I can remember standing there on the intersection of Ranui Station Road and Swanson Road on a Sunday. There'll be no traffic at all, and even during the week there'll be very little traffic, but there'll be no traffic at all, and it'll be so quiet on a hot sunny day that all you could hear would be in the distance would be Rupert Cook's cows lowing, and you could hear the cracking of the pine cones as the hot sun burst them open and all the seeds would come down. That would be the only sound you could hear, and just the crinkle of the grass and the long grass in the sun. It used to be so isolated. It was quite a tranquil place in those days, and I can see why they called it Ranui, because Ranui from the Maori is plenty of sun. I don't know who gave it that name either too. I'd be interested to hear sometime. I must investigate myself, find out who called it Ranui.
I love that. I love that example. It really illustrates the kind of mind's eye remembering. You know, you can feel him sort of imagining that time in his description. And he himself, in his recollection, is transported to that time as we are too. So how we collect. We know something of the what and the value, or the why of oral history. So let's look now quickly around how we collect from a collecting point of view. What you're seeing on your screen is actually a resource that you can find on the website of No Hands, of the National Oral History Association, titled Selecting a Repository. It's a really super helpful resource, whether you are at the beginning of an oral history project as a practitioner, or equally as a repository to address some of these questions. It asks really important questions. For example, in the first instance, which repository does the repository hold oral histories? What are asked to a proposed repository? Is the recording within the scope, or does the repository accept restricted material? What happens to the recording if it's accepted? How are the materials to be delivered, in what kind of format? What will be made available over the internet? What is the deposit process, like, you know, the physical transfer of documentation? And might it be the sole repository? What is the longevity of the institution, etc.? So there's a lot of questions there, which we're not going to read all of, but to say and to send those that are interested to this resource as a really useful way of building capacity for safely housing and making accessible oral history in your collecting. So a little bit more about how we collect here at Auckland Libraries. Material comes into collections really through various means. For us at Auckland Council Libraries, quite a number of our collections have come through commissioned projects. Actually, for decades now, within the sort of local council setting, we have supported projects that record local stories of people and place. And they are sort of a fairly significant part of our collections. This sometimes can take the form of us empowering communities or groups to do these projects themselves. I've been in front of quite a number of these groups, building capacity, doing training and development and support for their projects. But it also involves some wrangling, sometimes of budget, to work with contract oral historians who support projects into completion. One of the advantages I find of having a commissioned piece of work is that we have a sort of an early influence, I suppose, on the design of a project, and you get some clarity for the sort of technical requirements, the deliverables to us as a repository. For example, we can articulate our need for supplying recording agreement forms, for the quality of the audio recording material, to have the time-coded abstracts or finding aids associated. We talk about images and accompanying material, and people kind of come to understand really the fullness of the work and the related costs for delivery. And one of the ways that we do that is, like I mentioned, by presenting or by being part of training and supporting people into the practice, and also by supplying to Auckland Library members oral history recording kits, which means that we know that the quality of the recording will be meeting the preservation standards. We also receive donations. They're an important and valuable source of material. Sometimes these are a result of personal archives, people finding tapes or material kind of in a clear out or under a bed. Sometimes they come through people's academic projects where they want the material to be more accessible than a special collections in a university library might allow. Sometimes we receive organisational histories or anniversary projects. There's quite a few of those where people are taking the time to look back and to capture some story related to their organisation. Quite a lot of our sound archives come from historical society records, where they've recorded over the years their monthly presentations and talks, which hold a lot of very valuable kind of research information. And they often some of these donations that are retrospective, I suppose. People have done the work and then they're bringing in the material with a little bit of work sometimes to do in order to meet our acquisitions standards, and require a bit of sort of backlog work around finding aids. And lastly, to mention, being a selected repository for the Toko Iho Oral History Awards that have been managed and run by Manatū Taonga, has been a really important part of collection development across the country. And we hope in this environment that we will continue to be able to have those awards supporting pilot and new projects across the country. But like most collecting institutions, we can't take everything, and we do have an acquisitions process that requires the application of ensuring material has best fit with our collecting plans. And we quite often, when they don't, will find another collecting institute to refer as a more appropriate collecting place. So some brief collecting considerations for those working in various size collecting institutions. These are sort of my top of mind collecting considerations in a more technical space. Of course, we need to have the space for housing material, whether it be digital or analog, or both. So, for example, from a digital preservation, sort of a sound preservation, standard, an hour of recording is a gig of space. So we're dealing with relatively gig heavy files, because an average oral history may be 2 to 3 hours long. So we're looking at a fair amount of space. So we need to have some consideration about where that material will be, given that best practice is to have multiple copies as well. So the standard used to be 3 in different spaces. The good old hard drive, or the picture that you can see there is a RAID. It has different drives associated. You need to develop systems for safe handling, the ingestion, as well as the process of creating access files. So that's a digital migration from the preservation copy file into a more manageable file for delivery. There are questions around processes with that, with checksum and all sorts of things. This is really the area, if I can refer to Valerie Love at A2L, who really has a great deal of expertise in this area. And I'm sure that many of you already have these processes in place. I do want to talk about finding space around the kind of this hybrid, this safe handling with storage, because even though many of our collections are coming in digital and are digitized, you still need a filing cabinet and you need a space for your papers. We have handwritten agreement forms. We often have accompanying material that comes in alongside, and of course, this material often has quite a lot of personal identification material. So there needs to be sort of privacy issues addressed for that material. And then, of course, comes the process of creating metadata, catalogue records for discovery. And this is really the work of skilled librarians. I want to acknowledge my colleagues Liz Bradley and Philippa Templeton and doing that work here. You really kind of need some infrastructure too for that material to land and to be discoverable. And for us, that's the content DM or public facing as Kura Heritage Collections Online. And that expertise sits with the team of Tim Barnett, who I think many of you would have heard talk recently. And then, of course, there's the systems of supply and delivery of material. And we have just recently in the last, just this year, beginning of this year, we started using RefTracker to funnel all of our research inquiries through, whether they come through Kura or through across the desk. It means that the request comes to me as the curator, and I can look at the management of the delivery of that file to ensure that the permissions are correct. And that can be done in person in a reading room, or we've also developed the ability to deliver via OneDrive with non-downloadable kind of expiry date situations for researchers who are either out of town or who can't come into the reading room. So those are some of the sort of high level, I suppose, collecting considerations that you need to think about and that we have thought about. For me, the burning issues that are still sitting out there is for us the challenge of the increase in audiovisual documentary making or audiovisual oral history creation, which has a lot of appeal for people in terms of being able to see expressions, not just to tune to the voice, but of course it comes with a lot more digital weight in terms of storage and how we manage that. There is an increasing use of AI in the community as creations of finding aids, and perhaps an unclear understanding of the data sovereignty implications of that use by practitioners. There has been some conversation around the potential for using the permissions or the agreement form to be more explicit about the potential use of that tool to people who are giving interviews so that they understand where their voice might travel. And I certainly would like that recorded in terms of the provenance that has gone into the creation of our oral histories. And that really links into the discussion around data sovereignty, which is more extensive than the use of AI. It includes, where materials stored and the bigger question of who owns the story effectively. And the other thing that's a burning issue for me is ensuring that our analogue material is migrated. We are in that very, very misty window now, especially around things like VHS, which is really not particularly stable, and how are we going to make sure that we can tell those stories that were being recorded in the kind of 80s and 90s using that format. So nearly done. Not quite sure where the time is at, but just a quick look. I want to look back at the use value. This is really where my expertise and passion kind of lies, really, is in how we then do interpretive work and the value that we get from these collections. And in our context, we've been doing them a lot using old material in podcasts and to support exhibitions. One of the examples I've put up on the screen is Stepping Back from the Shed, which was an exhibition held in one of our Māngere Art Centre that was about the Westfield freezing works, drew on the archive that we had there, drew on some old oral history with freezing workers, and also generated some new oral histories of people who were invited and drawn into seeing themselves in that exhibition. There is a reference up there to the Dominion Road Stories, the musical. One of the permissions for use on the oral history agreement form talks about the use in performance or in theatre. And I know that when I first saw that, I thought, really? But in fact, there are now increasing examples of the use of it. And this was a musical that was drawn out of quite a 55 odd recordings that we did around the Dominion Road landscape. And there, of course, is verbatim theatre. Hakapati is a good example of that. This weekend, we're going to the Avondale Racecourse, where artists have used both oral history and soundscape to create a walking experience when you're on the racecourse and you can hear the stories through the loudspeakers there. And you may well have seen the use of the Political Diaries project in the recent film, The Prime Minister. We use and create material often in a sort of a community development space around placemaking. Nod there to the Glen Eden stories, which also drew on our old collection and in the process created new collection. They can be used for walking tours. We did that with Panmure, with the High Street there, where old oral histories were used to be part of a generated walking app. You can see an example there of a request that's come through RefTracker just a couple of days ago, where he's asking to listen to his grandfather's oral history, sound archive talking on flying boats. So whakapapa and family history requests are common through our discoverability. I think like finding an old photo of your person is really exciting, but finding the old voice of it is really, people are really moved by that experience. And sometimes I had one last week where a woman found the Danish migration collection that we had. She knew her father had migrated around that time. Not his voice, but she wants to listen to it to see something of the experience of what that would have been like for him. And lastly, it's actually not up on the screen, but it's an academic example that's come back round to us recently, where some of our material is used to create a body or a corpus of material for a linguistics project, where they're looking for Auckland accents or variations on the New Zealand English. And that project kind of has continued to manifest over, well, more than a decade, I think now, since we provided that material for the corpus. And also I had translated in the last few years a series of old Te Reo Māori recordings, which were really interesting. The feedback from the translator was, some of the difficulties they had around old Māori or old reo and the colloquialisms and the use of language to new. So they hold also real value in terms of that aspect of material. This is my last slide before we hopefully have some questions. And it's going to finish with the voice of a researcher. It's from an oral history on New Zealand journal, which is what you receive if you're a member of the National Association, or you might receive an institutional membership. Printed in 2021, this article, Listening In. It's written by Hannah Liu, who came to us at Auckland Libraries as part of the Auckland History Initiative, scholarship from the University of Auckland. She writes really vividly of the experience of listening in, drawing on the Chinese New Zealand Oral History Foundation material to write about Chinese Auckland history. So I'll just read this opening paragraph of hers. Stripped down to its essentials, the act of listening to an interview is really a kind of delayed, permitted eavesdropping. The researcher plays a recording and hears a conversation that has already taken place, created by people in the past for someone in the future. Different from both self-conducted interviews and written transcripts, it is a historical practice needing its own considerations, which is what she does in the article, and concludes, listening to oral history can be an intimate experience, as if the voice of the past is speaking directly in one's ear. But in between the researcher and the person on the title of the recording sits context, relationships, interests, and memory. I have discussed some of my experiences with these issues, and perhaps more relevantly, the role of the interviewer. Both creator and participant, the interviewer molds the telling of the story, and the study of the recording is revealed to be a crucial part of its history. So there's much to think about in that, and of course around this work, which is where I'm going to leave us to think about this format, this question, why have an oral history collection? I'm interested in your questions and your feedback. So I'd like to come back to you, Rachel, and say ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa for the time today.
Just having a fight with my Zoom link. Refuses to let me come back. Oh, here we are. Thank you so much. So it's fascinating, and I really loved the clip that you played from Ranui, where he talked about the heat. It's such a vivid example. Thank you very much for your treasured insights over your career, I guess, that we've been listening to. So just like to encourage our participants to pepper the chat with your questions, and we will field them. We have probably about 5 minutes or so. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions. We'll start with one at the very top from Erica. She's just asked about if you have a preferred recording device.
I am using, and what we make available to the community is a Zoom, not of this variety, but it's the type of recording device, H5 or H6. They update themselves all the time. when we first started moving to digital, we were on the H4, which was quite a little bit of a testing beast in terms of setting the levels. The H5 is much simpler. It's got some sort of external knobs for being able to adjust the line in for the different microphones. So, or the levels for the different microphones. So that's a key thing, is having the ability to potentially have a lapel mic that you can record on different channels, both the interviewer and the interviewee. As that end of that article was quoting, you know, the questions that the interviewer asks are important for future researchers to hear as much as the answers. So getting that kind of balance is important, and the Zoom H5 does do that.
Thanks very much, Sue. So there's another. Sorry.
Yep.
You go.
I was just going to say, it does record to a sound card, so it's not a solid state device. I mean, ultimately, some of the more expensive solid state devices are better, but this is a very about $1,500 for the full kit, so it's kind of accessible.
Good practical advice. Thank you. There's another quick question here. Someone's just saying that having difficulty accessing through your catalogue, they wanted to know about the process. That's quite a specific question to your catalogue, I guess. But I guess supplementary question to that would be, have you experimented with different forms of, user experience over the years, things that have worked and things that haven't?
So we don't make our full recordings accessible through the catalogue. We don't attempt to do that. Some of the catalogues, have like a little clip. You might see a little clip that would be like less than a minute. And we put those up at one point because we wanted it helped with the surfacing of our material through Digital NZ. And it gives a kind of, I guess, somebody who comes to the catalogue a sense of the voice of the person. So the way that we basically make accessible now, discover the person or the collection that you want to listen to. If you're doing that through Kura, there's a comments box at the bottom, and you can request through that to be able to listen. It comes to me, and then I start to engage through Ref Tracker and the delivery of that. So, I mean, and up until not that long ago, we used to, you had to either physically come into a reading room, and before digitization, of course, digital files and our access files are MP3, so they are compressed. We used to make copy tapes, tape to tape, and then we would have the preservation tape stays in the cool store, and people were given a copy tape to listen to. But now the copy tape equivalent is an MP3.
I remember those days. Erica's got a follow-up question just about, do you have a preferred digital preservation format used?
Digital preservation format.
That's a question, yeah.
I mean, I guess
it's a standard, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. The standard is to record 48 kilohertz, 24 bits. So that is the sort of the depth and the breadth of the digitization process as the sound wave goes into that process, how many grabs it's going to have of the sound wave and the depth of it. And that is the international preservation standard, 48 kilohertz, 24 bits. So any machine that's doing that is good. And that means it's not sort of compressed. So, when you listen to an MP3, it's sort of it's compressed the sound to make it less gigabyte heavy, more usable, I guess, on some levels. And the voice, you don't necessarily kind of lose much. I mean, if you're listening to music, sometimes you can tell that's got a thinness, but for access, for listening, for researchers, it's perfectly good standard to be delivering. Yeah. But the preservation files, they just go onto the hard drive, and Tim's team looks after those.
Okay, we've got 3 chunky questions here. I reckon we can get them in 5 minutes, but let's give it a go anyway. Great first one, which is about, you mentioned about using the OneDrive. I thought that was interesting as well. So Karen was just asking, can you elaborate on how you make the oral history accessible to people who can't visit your library using, I guess, some of the new tech and software that's available to us. Yeah.
Yeah, so we haven't afforded to be able to create our own bespoke system for delivery. So we are currently using OneDrive, which is a Microsoft product, effectively, and I take the MP3 and I load it through my profile or my colleague Liz, and you can change the settings for delivery when you do that around the shareability. You do that with documents too, whether people can edit, whether they can, and so you can choose that they can't download it. And you can also choose an expiry date. So you can say, this is available for you to listen to through this link, and you've got a month to do so. So I don't leave material just sort of sitting out there in perpetuity. It's a sort of a negotiated access for researchers, but it certainly does make material accessible for those either that are not specifically in Auckland or that, largely a lot of researchers are working in the digital space. So that's how that works.
Great. A good question here around incorporating, AI and moving forward. So how will we develop a oral history permission form that covers new tech? So AI, digital storage, etc. So making sure that's in there.
Yes, I think we definitely have room to do that. Just like I remember the form back in the day pre-internet where we never used to have and may be available on the World Wide Web kind of thing. So now we have to take the next step of adding beyond the World Wide Web, and maybe an AI technology may be used to create finding aids, or maybe used to develop, I don't know, interpretation, or and we haven't done that yet here at Auckland Libraries. I have been in discussion with mana taonga at the time when Emma Kelly was there, and with Turnbull and with Anna Green from the National Library about the National Association about this, because I think we do need to make those considerations transparent, make it transparent. I think a big part of the relationship building and what makes good oral history practice is that clarity and transparency around where people's voice may be used immediately and potentially into the future. So and those are the questions that most people ask when they're invited to participate in a project is, where's it going to be, who's going to have access to it, and what might it be used for? So they are your three really key questions. And then also on the agreement form is a nod to the Privacy Act, which is a whole another discussion we could have, and also to copyright, of course. So yeah, and there's a very good explanatory notes piece of work on the No Hands website under that resources page. So you can go and have a look at that.
So we'll just quick note that we will make sure that we email out with the recording some of the links that Sue's been mentioning. I agree with you. That's could be another topic, couldn't it, that we could get into. It's quite a lot to discuss in there. Right, we've got two more. I'm just going to go in reverse. Tegan's asked, have you had any problems with interviewees wanting to redact their interview?
Yes, I don't necessarily see it as a problem. I think the agency really sits with the interviewee. It's their story, and they need to feel comfortable about what it is that they're contributing to a public repository. So sometimes we encourage, through discussion, we might just put a restriction on a part of an interview rather than necessarily redacting. We don't tend to go through and edit. Occasionally, we might just edit some material at their request, and sometimes we look at material and think, well, does this have the potential for defamation? Like, as a repository, we have some responsibility also for that information that sits in our collection. So there is an element sometimes of redaction, but it's very limited and fairly rare that happens.
Good to know. And then Elizabeth has asked from Cambridge, just the last question here for today's session anyway, asking around what are your thoughts about a hybrid model of an oral history collection, the first approach being audio only, and then maybe returning to record AV if appropriate as a way to manage the weight of digital files. Is that something that would be covered off in a collection plan?
Indeed. And I think Elizabeth and I have had discussions about this, because I think that is kind of my suggested way for projects forward, is to do more fuller interviews just using the audio. And then, because quite often people want to do AV because they're in the process of production, they're making a documentary of some kind, and in a way it's easier to potentially go back to that from the oral history interview and record just that part. I mean, it's not always the case. Sometimes we do have talking heads, like full oral histories that are recorded, but I think it's a really good potential model to be able to balance both of those things. And we do sometimes we keep and accession actually kind of production or material that's come from the primary source. Like it would be like a public, it's the equivalent of a book, of a publication. So we might accession a film or documentary that's made that features some of the primary material, or a podcast or a sound recording. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a part of the raft of considerations you made, I guess. Well, I mean, I think we've squeezed a lot, or you've squeezed a lot, I should say, into an hour, and we really appreciate your time, and for everybody's time coming along today. So again, just letting you all know that we're going to be emailing out the recording and links, and if you've got follow-up questions, Sue's generously offered to incorporate her email address so that you can follow up directly. So we really appreciate that. Thank you, Sue. And we just want to do a quick plug to say, if you haven't already, make sure you've signed up to the NDF newsletter, because you can then hear about any other online sessions that could be of interest, or come to us with suggestions. And to let you know that the next session for NDF is going to be through our very own coordinator, Holly Grover. And it's going to be about finding out better ways of using digital tools that you have, and maybe perhaps with some help from AI, help with asking the right questions and articulating digital challenges in IT-friendly ways. So lots of top tips from Holly about how to use all of the new tools we have at our disposal. So Holly's going to post links in the chat, but my remaining job is to give a round of applause to Sue and say thank you so much for your time. It was a treat for me to spend my lunchtime listening. Actually, I hardly ever get that opportunity. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Kia ora.